Handcraft Bespoke Tailoring, by virtue of its name, its title, tells you need tools that you work with your hands. We don't use a lot of machine. And here we have the basics of what is required. Needle, thimble, chalk, tape measure, shears, and some materials to work with. First of all, we'll start with the chalk, because tailors, we work miracles with pins, chalk, and tape. Here is the Hancock chalk. It's a square chalk. You would have seen the triangle chalks. I prefer to work with the square chalks, or the rectangle chalk, if you like to be more exact, is because I can use all four sides. I've got four sides to use. It's a little bit more efficient when I'm working. Tape measure, of course, here, both imperial and metric, inches, centimeters. Here, I use both, and you'd find that very easy to relate to. Needles. Of course, hand sewing, we need needles. And here is the between needles, John James betweens number 7. Between number 7 and number 9, they're the perfect needle for sewing the various stitches. This number 7 you would find would be more comfortable when you're doing the felling of linings and cross stitches and so on. But when it comes to basting, you'll find number 9 needles are better because it's slightly longer. A lot of the basting is done on the table, so we would need to actually go down and up again. So the needles being slightly longer is essential. Thimbles. Thimble, as you're right-handed, is worn on the middle finger of the right hand. The action of the needle and thimble movement is one complete action. So when you push the needle from the back of the finger. Short ruler for marking out short areas like pockets and so on. And of course we have a yard or a centimeter, or a meter rather, longer rule for the longer lines. The square here, which I use a lot because all the measurements are calculated in eighths, quarters, and halves. I tend to use 16ths, eighths, quarters, and halves when I'm drafting patterns, because all the measurements is much more efficient because the measurements are calculated. It's all very traditional, old-fashioned materials and tools. The shears, paper shears for cutting patterns, it's very cleverly designed. You've got a very, very long handle with a short blade. And the object of this here is so that when we're cutting the paper, we won't damage our hands, or the paper won't cut our hands, because pattern paper is very, very sharp. Cutting shears, full cutting shears. This I acquired from Mr. Maurice Sedwell. He bought this when he started his apprenticeship in 1930, I think it was, and I acquired it in 1988 from Mr. Sedwell when I took over running Maurice Sedwell Limited. Very essential as well is the tracing wheel. Very sharp spikes here. And the object of a very sharp spike is, again, you're transferring information from the cloth onto the paper. So when we penetrate the cloth like this, and you see there are absolutely no damages at all, the paper is below the cloth so that we transfer the information from the cloth onto the paper to create a master template for each customer. We can see the patterns here that I've made, which is transferring information from the cloth onto the paper using the tracing wheel and then highlighting it with the pen marks, pocket details and dart details and so on. Trimmers. Smaller trimmers is easy when you're working on a machine or you have to cut ends of threads. Easy to actually work with. They all have their own purpose. Cutting patterns, cutting cloth, cutting threads, and sometimes cutting the interlinings and body linings because it's lighter. There are just 3 or 4 different types of threads that we use in tailoring actually. The first one, of course, is the basting thread, generally in white, only because we can actually distinguish the white threads from the actual finishing threads, which the finishing threads are matching the cloth of the garment that you're making. The white threads are not, because you can see these threads. It's strong enough so that it won't break when you put the garment on for a fitting, but not too strong that you can't take it apart. And now we've got a slightly heavier, stronger cotton, but thin compared to the finishing cottons. See, there's a little bit more tension required to break this one. Okay, there. And of course, the machine thread, which is a standard cotton thread, just a little thicker than the other two, but strong enough, because bear in mind you're making a garment with this thread. It has to be strong enough so that the seams won't break, and you can see more tension to this one. The strongest thread of all is the Guntermann hand silk. As you can see, it's a pure silk, especially for hand sewing the edges and linings and so on. But I tend to do a lot more sewing with the hand silk than any other tailor, because a lot of the work I do is actually crafted by hand. Very little machine work, as you will come to learn. It comes in 1 meter length, just over 1 yard, so that we can comfortably sew when we stretch our hands out.
Do you have any tips for threading a needle?
Absolutely I do. Make sure that the thread goes straight through the hole. There. So this is approximately 1/2 meter or 20 inches, so that when you're sewing, you're holding a garment here, you're sewing, you don't have to pull a long way away. So it's comfort, it's speed, and so on. Thimble, needle, one complete action. Not 4 actions, but 1 action into the thread and back out again, which I will demonstrate later on to you. Now we're going to cover the most important, or perhaps one of the most important, which is the cloth. So if you'd pass me that length of cloth there, please. This is the material that the suit's going to be made of. It's 100% pure cashmere cable stripe by Scabal. Very tightly spun worsted. If you feel that, soft, luxurious. This is what we're going to...
How heavy is this cloth?
This, in ounces, this is approximately 9 ounces, which is a good all year round weight. Very good question. All year round weight. You know, wintertime you'd wear a coat, summertime perhaps you won't, but you won't want to wear a suit anyway. But this is a good all year round weight when you've got to wear for business. Now here I've decided to set myself a challenge as I teach you how to make a suit. I've chosen to use a stripe cloth. The reason why I've chosen to use a stripe is because I've got to match the stripes, and I'll show you the process of actually cutting the garment to match the stripe all the way through the making process as well. You would need approximately 3 meters 30 for a suit length, but for the jacket you'd need just 2 meters. And you can get, your suppliers could be Holland & Sherry, Scabal, Laird Brown and Dunsford, Dormay, lots of the top merchants. As we're doing handcraft tailoring to a very, very high standard, I would want you to buy the finest materials as well. It's very important that the engine, the foundation of the garment, has to be of the finest quality, because the exterior, which is like the surface, you know, would also look pretty, would last long, look attractive. Bear in mind you're sculpturing cloth into a form to be portrayed by people who would be wearing them. So make sure that you choose the right cloths.
And what do you look for in a good cloth?
It is the durability, the fineness of the yarn, the strength of the cloth. But what is important, if you're working for customers, for instance, you've got to communicate, or you've got to ask, what would the purpose of the suit be? And then depending on the purpose of the suit, then you would choose a cloth accordingly. And material then interlining, if you pass this canvas to me. This is the body canvas, which helps create the foundation of the garment. This is actually, I import all my body linings from Italy. It's made especially for me. It's made of cotton and horsehair. The reason why it's horsehair is because if you bend the horsehair, it always wants to come back straight. And now the foundation of the garment is so that when you crumple it, it actually comes back up without all the creases. You would need 1 meter of horsehair. You can acquire this from Savile Row Academy. Then we have the chest canvas, which comes from the waist upwards, and that also has a higher percentage of horsehair. The body canvas has a lesser percentage of horsehair. The chest canvas has a higher percentage because it's a lot springy. You can see it is not fold sharp. You can see it comes into the circle there, that round. It means that this does not bend quite as easily, and it springs right back. You want the chest area to be slightly firmer, soft but firmer, whereas from the chest down has to be light and loose and a lot more comfortable for the garment when it's being worn, or for the person who's wearing the garment. The chest canvas is called laptier as well, commonly called chest canvas because it goes on the chest, but the correct name is laptier. You would need approximately 18 inches of laptiers. What's that in 36, about 45 centimeters. Now, the hand stitches that we do with the very light, weaker threads has to be sunk into the cloths. Now, because of this being horsehair, the stitches can't be sunk into the horsehair. So we have a very soft cashmere-like cloth, which is made, it's actually pure cotton. It feels as luxurious as a pure cashmere, doesn't it?
Yeah.
When we sew through the chest canvas, we sew under domet. This is called a domet. So the threads actually sink into the pile surface of this. So when you press over it, you get a smooth press.
And how much domet will you need?
Domet, again, you need approximately 1/3 of 30 centimeters or so would be enough. You get this from Savile Academy. All the materials and the fabrics and the cloths that you need, Savile Academy can provide that to you. Right, we've done the main cloths and the fabrics required for the foundation of the suit. Now this here is linen and silicea. Silicea is used for pocket bags, strong, very, very tightly woven, which is used for the pocket bag. Here we have linen, which is usually used in pockets and edges of jackets. But I tend not to use linen for the edge of the jacket. I used a bias Hermesine lining tape. And the reason for that is that we can have a nice thin edge, soft thin edge, but without it being limp.
And why is it on the bias?
Because there's a little bit of movement and stretch. You know, it's like if you had a building that's very solid, it'll fall over with heavy winds. Same with sewing seams. You've got to have a certain amount of movement into the seams so the seams won't break. Now this is a bit of fun. This is the body lining that we're using for this suit. It coordinates nicely, but it also stands out in itself. And this is a pure silk lining that can be purchased anywhere. Your choice of lining is unlimited. You can use fancy lining, plain linings, anything you like. But it's softer, it's lighter. So when you put the garment on, slips over the shirt, this slips on easily. Always use a lining that's lighter than the actual cloth for the suit. The reason for that, you don't want a lining which is on the inside to be controlling the cloth on the outside. It has to be lighter. There are lots and lots of different qualities and designs that you can choose. The amount that you need should correspond with the amount that you need for the suit. You need 3 meters for a suit, but in this case we're making a jacket, which we need 2 meters. And getting 2 meters of lining is more than you need. To be exact, 1.80 meters of lining. Always be very aware of saving costs. 2 meters it would be okay, but I think 1.80 meters would be just about right. But,
and what would you recommend material-wise for linings?
Usually a polyester is a good lining, affordable. This is a lot more expensive being silk, but you know, polyester lining or cupro lining is actually quite good as well. Next is a sleeve board. Would you like to pass that over for me, please? Sleeve board essential. When it comes to shaping the garment, this will be padded. And here we'll press the chest, the sleeves, and various parts of the garment. You get it closer to you, and you can control whatever you're working on the sleeve board.
Where would I find one of these?
Well, I tend to have mine made.
Okay.
And you will observe on this one, the base here is narrower than the top, and this is the top part. The wider bit is the bit that you need to use.
I've seen some on eBay, but they're not quite as big as this. Do they have to be of at least this size?
Well, this size it's ideal because here I can get the sleeves into the edge. I can then turn to the side when we come to the process of making to open the seams and the front edge as well. So it has more than one purpose, not just for the sleeves, but for opening the edges, the front edges, and opening seams. When you don't want to get the weight and the heat of the iron and the rest of the cloth, but just to be focused on the seam that you opened, you use the edge here. This is a weight that you can get from Morplan. It's a good length. I tend to use 2 of these actually, which is laid onto the paper pattern, which is onto the cloth. So when I'm chalk marking, the pattern does not move along. So this is a very useful piece of kit to have as well. Now it's really, really important that you have all the right equipment in an effort to make the perfect suit. You're putting a lot of time and effort in training yourself to a very, very high standard. If you have the right equipment, then you can be assured of progressing in the right way for becoming a master tailor.
Fantastic.